Through yet another political upheaval, the former Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, who led the Labour Party to an unprecedented victory less than 2 years ago, has resigned, has stepped down as Prime Minister of Britain just earlier this week. The man who's expected to succeed him is Andy Burnham, who is a recently elected Member of Parliament. He's been Minister in previous Labour governments and for a very long time the Mayor of Greater Manchester. Will Mr. Burnham be able to solve Britain's myriad problems, whether it's the cost of living crisis, the housing crisis, the immigration problem, or the NHS problem? Someone who's known Mr. Burnham for a number of years now is a close associate and a very well-known British cardiologist, author and campaigner. Dr. Aseem Malhotra is now joining us here on Times Now. Thank you very much, Dr. Malhotra. I will come to the topic of health and COVID and all of that in just a moment, but because Mr. Burnham is in the news and because British politics is in the news right now, as someone who's known him for a number of years, why do you believe he's the best man suited to lead Britain at this given point of time?
Thanks for having me on, Zakka. So yes, I have known Andy for the best part of 20 years, initially introduced to me by my late father, Dr. Kailash Chand Malhotra, who was the honorary vice president of the BMA when he passed away. And I would say almost certainly, and I'm sure Andy would agree with this, probably his most trusted health advisor. So of course there is personal bias here. But Zakka, I have spent, 15 years plus as a prominent campaigner where I have been involved in issues related to excess sugar consumption, poor diet, big pharma's excesses, where I have interacted with numerous politicians from all political parties, given lectures in Parliament as well. And of all the people that I've met and I've known, in my view, Andy understands the root cause of the problem. He is a man that listens. And I'm actually, I tweeted this when he got elected as MP for Makerfield, essentially almost certainly going to be the next Prime Minister. It was one of the happiest days in the last 5 years of my life because I genuinely feel hope that Andy Burnham can turn things around for Britain and even have a knock-on impact in the rest of the world.
But some would say the problems that Britain is going through, and not just now, it's been going through for almost 10 years now, you can trace it all the way back to Brexit, whether it's the immigration problem, whether it's the energy crisis, the cost of living crisis, and most infamously, and you know this better than any of us, the crisis in the health sector, in the NHS. Some would say, 6 prime ministers before him have tried and failed. Why would Mr. Burnham be successful? The problems are far bigger than the man. Sorry, that's...
Absolutely, Zakka, you're absolutely right. That is the question to ask. Without understanding the root cause of a problem, any solutions you offered are going to be flawed. And the one thing that gave me more hope than anything else is Andy has, in his interviews, made it very clear, and I will explain why I agree with him on this from my own analysis, that the root cause, or a major root cause of the problems in the West, and I would even say that have even affected, India as well, is neoliberalism. He said the last 40 years of neoliberal economic model has got us to where we are now, and it's failed, or it's certainly failing. And what does that mean? It really means that we've given too much power to big corporations who now really dominate our lives. They exploit information when it comes to our health. They don't give people fair wages. Okay, we talk about health cost of living crisis. And these are the real root causes of why people are unhappy and why their health is going the wrong direction. And if you haven't got a healthy population, Zakka, you don't have an economically productive one either. So everything for me, and certainly Andy understands this better than anyone, comes back to understanding what is the root cause of our health problems. And on a structural level, it is, in my view, the economic system that we're currently in.
Can I just press on that point a bit? Because some would say, as far as Britain in particular is concerned, the root cause of all its problems can be traced back to that disastrous decision of Brexit, of leaving the European conclave, as it were. And I'm yet to see a British politician who would come out, in the public domain and say, that was a mistake, let's go back to how Britain was pre-2016.
I think the problems were there before 2016, though, Zakka. I'll tell you on a health perspective. Since 2010, life expectancy in the UK has stalled, and now in many parts of the country is going the wrong direction. People are living in more chronic ill health. So the problems were already there and getting exacerbated before Brexit. There are pros and cons to the Brexit argument. One of the reasons that I personally would see an advantage of Brexit, and actually I think this played out in the pandemic, is that it gave Britain more sovereignty and less control over the big corporations who are influencing laws across Europe. For example, we never had the type of mandates when it came to the COVID vaccine that were implemented in other parts of Europe in the UK. You know, there's a guy in Finland who I'm a key witness in a court case that's going to the European Court of Human Rights called Mika Vokala, who was a businessman who was refused entry into a cafeteria to have a cup of coffee because he didn't have a COVID vaccine pass. We never got to that level in the UK. And part of the reason even Jeremy Corbyn, who one would describe as, you know, old school, traditional hard left, Jeremy Corbyn supported Brexit as well for that. One of those very reasons is to reduce that grip of corporate power over the United Kingdom that was spreading throughout Europe.
But one of the problems that's really come to the fore in the last 10 years, and certainly since COVID, since the last 5 years, is that the number of people who are immigrating to the UK from European countries has come down substantially, and the number of people who are immigrating to the UK from outside the EU has gone up substantially. And that's leading to huge problems with the existing population there in the UK, and that explains the rise of, let's say, a political party like Reform UK. I mean, if elections were to be held today, most opinion polls seem to suggest that Reform UK would win and Mr. Farage would become the next Prime Minister.
Well, I think 2 points to make there, Zakka. I think that these discussions need to be had. We can't sweep them under the carpet. We can't, just say that if somebody's raising concerns about immigration, that, use a straw man argument, they're automatically racist. I think it's about right type of immigration. It's about people coming in that are going to contribute to the country, contribute to society, with elements of compassion as well, because, of course, that often involves them bringing family members that may not be people that are, necessarily working towards, directly towards the economy. So we have to try and get the balance right. And that is a discussion that we need to keep having, for sure.
If I may, just before I come to the COVID-19 part, in your experience as the child of immigrants, how has that experience changed? Do you see perceptible changes around you in the conversation around immigration and lived experiences in the last 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, Zakka, I grew up in Greater Manchester. And just to give context here, I experienced racism on a very regular basis as a child, to the point where I would feign illness as a child when my parents wanted to go out shopping in Greater Manchester on the weekend, because undoubtedly we would suffer some form of racial abuse, called Packy, for example. My dad was not Shrinking Violet, he was not the kind of guy that would just shy away, and he was always up for a confrontation if someone said something. So that would scare me. So I even got attacked by neo-Nazis once in the local park. Overt racism in that way has completely declined. I can't remember the last time somebody said something to me, even when there's been a disagreement, say, on the road when you're driving, which has been, used racially motivated terms. So I think there's been much progress on that front. I think structural racism is still a problem. We know that related to socioeconomics. We know, for example, during the COVID pandemic, people from ethnic minority backgrounds were more vulnerable to dying from COVID, in part related to socioeconomics, in part related to stress related to structural racism, which is still a problem. But I would say almost certainly, hand on heart, Zakka, I'm proud to call myself a British Indian. And if there was any country in Europe that I would choose to live as an immigrant, a second generation immigrant, if you like, it would still be United Kingdom.
Okay, now let me come to the COVID part. And just recently, I think a few days ago, on the other side of the Atlantic, the former Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, I think it was on the last day as DNI, she released a report which basically alleged that Dr. Anthony Fauci, who was one of the leading doctors in the US at that time during COVID, him and his people allegedly directed millions of US taxpayer dollars towards the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which was under a lot of cloud for being the place from where COVID allegedly came. A lot of people, including you, received a lot of flack at that time for saying that this was lab-driven disease. But now the DNI in its report has claimed that the United States had funded more than 120 biolabs across 30 countries. Do you believe in a way that if this is indeed true, that people like you and others who had been saying that COVID was lab originated, that this was not some, wet market origin. You've been vindicated in a way?
Zakka, yes, to some degree, but I think more importantly, rather than it being a personal ego of vindication, it's about getting justice and getting to the truth. If somebody had written this script, they would have thought this was a far-fetched movie. In the same way, no one could have predicted what happened with the Twin Towers going down, in 2001. They thought if this was a movie, people would have thought this is incredible. This is beyond beggars' belief. We are in the same situation here now in many ways with the COVID pandemic. Almost certainly the evidence points it coming to a lab. The evidence is increasingly looking like Anthony Fauci. And of course, we have to give him fair trial, but it's looking increasingly likely that he directly was involved in not just covering up the origins of COVID related to work that he had been involved in funding, this gain-of-function research, but had actually gone out of his way to attack and to smear and discredit, such as Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who is now the director of the NIH, a good friend of mine, to making those people, be untrustworthy. So this is what we're having to deal with now, Zakka, and I think that we have to understand the roots of all this. It's not going away, because unless we understand how this all happened, the same mistakes and same problems may keep repeating itself. And in particular, how this particular COVID virus was then exploited by, big corporations have been described and diagnosed as being pathological when it comes to making money.
But tell me this, Dr. Fauci, of course, has a great standing in the United States. He is seen as one of the leading sort of doctors in that country. And if it indeed is true, and like you said, it still has to be proven in a court of law, how does that contrast with the number of testimonies he's given to both the Senate and to the House that the NIH, under his leadership, has never funded any gain-of-function research, including in this infamous Wuhan lab?
Well, we're speculating now, Zakka, aren't we? We've got the former director of the National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, as she leaves, being very explicit with the evidence that she has looked at, which doesn't look good for Anthony Fauci. So I think it would be unfair for us to comment other than what we've heard already. But I think, separate to whether Anthony Fauci knew this or not, the evidence seems to be clear that this came from a lab. It was a lab leak. It was a very unusual type of virus in the way that it presented, the knock-on effects to people, the people that suffered unnecessarily from it, the people that died. And I think that we have to try and look for solutions moving forward to mitigate harms now. In my view, what will turn out to be probably one of the greatest scandals or medical mistakes in history, which was the mass rollout of an untested product, and certainly with no long-term safety record, which was a new type of gene therapy rather than the vaccine, which is what it was called, which are the mRNA vaccines. And even something else which I must mention as well, Zakka, which is related to India. I was on a speaking tour of India in 2023 and invited by certain members of the Ambani family and giving talks in hospitals. And I was shocked to learn at that point, because I'd been campaigning on exposing all of the concerns and harms of the mRNA vaccine, is that Covishield was in fact AstraZeneca vaccine, which was banned from use across the whole of Europe in 2021 because of very common significant side effects, including blood clots. And that was continued to be used in India, which I found extraordinary. So that still needs an investigation, because I have met so many people, Zakka. I've lost count of the people that have suffered unnecessarily because of vaccine injury, have lost loved ones at a young age. One of my closest friends from university, his younger brother had, Punjabi man, he in his early 40s. I've known him since I was, a teenager. And he basically sadly got metastatic colon cancer and died very recently. His family and he believed that this was because of the AstraZeneca vaccine. So there's lots of questions that are unanswered. And this is an ongoing problem because, as I said in the US Senate in my testimony a couple of weeks ago, there may be millions of people around the world who are at risk of premature heart disease and cancer, but we need to get to the bottom of it through an honest, open, transparent discussion. Andy Burnham is one person historically, with other scandals that have happened related to the infected blood scandal in the UK, a hormone pregnancy drug called Primados, exposing all those. For me, he is one person that is not afraid to take this on.
All right, Dr. Aseem Malhotra, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for joining us with your thoughts and perspective here on Times Now. Thank you.